Mr. Cornyn, aye. Mr. Pryor. Mr. Pryor, aye. Ms. Ayotte, aye. Mr. Levin, no. Mr. Shelby, aye. Mr. Hatch, aye. Mrs. McCaskill, no. Mr. Carper, no. Mr. Burr, aye. Ms. Murkowski, aye. Mrs. Gillibrand, no. Mr. Thune, aye. Mr. Nelson of Nebraska, aye. Mr. Wyden. Mr. Wyden, no. Mr. Sessions. Mr. Sessions, aye. Ms. Klobuchar. Ms. Klobuchar, aye. Mr. Udall of Colorado, no. Mrs. Shaheen, aye. Mr. Warner. Mr. Warner, no. Mr. Rockefeller. Mr. Rockefeller, no.
Are there any senators in the chamber wishing to vote or wishing to change their vote? If not, on this vote, the yeas are 53, the nays are 46. Under the previous order requiring 60 votes for the adoption of this amendment, the amendment is not agreed to.
Mr. President.
Under the previous order, the motion to reconsider is considered made and laid upon the table. Majority Leader.
Mr. President. Senator McConnell and I have discussed what we should do the rest of the day. We have a number of senators have come to both of us wanting to offer amendments. We think that we need to have people offer amendments so we can find the universe of the amendments so we can work through these and try to come up with some reasonable way to proceed forward. Having said that, I want people to offer amendments on my side. Senator McConnell, I think, feels the same way on his side, and then we'll make a determination later today as to how we're going to proceed on this next week. I think it would be fruitless at this stage to have a bunch of votes this afternoon. Well, we'd have to take consent to have the vote, so I don't think there'll be any votes this afternoon.
forward.
Oh, good.
Mr. President,
Wisconsin.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent to set aside the pending amendment, and I call up my amendment number 389.
Is there objection? Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Mr. President.
The clerk will report.
The senator from Wisconsin, Mr. Cole, proposes an amendment numbered 389. At the end of the bill, insert the following.
Without objection.
Can I speak or do I? Mr. President.
Senator from Texas.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent to set aside the pending amendment.
Is there objection? Without objection.
Mr. President, I call up amendment number 423.
Clerk will report.
Mr. President, I ask
The senator from Texas, Mrs. Hutchison, for herself and others, proposes an amendment numbered 423.
I ask unanimous consent to dispense with the reading of the amendment.
Without objection.
Mr. President, this is an amendment that I hope will save our businesses and our states the millions of dollars that they are now spending to implement the health care reform bill that is in the courts. Today, or actually it was yesterday, the court in Atlanta, the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals in Atlanta, heard arguments from the government and the states about whether the Florida District Court ruling that the health care law is null and void because it is unconstitutional should be upheld. Since we are in this court fight, and this will surely go to the Supreme Court, there is no doubt that either side that loses is going to appeal. My amendment would put a moratorium on the implementation of the law. So it would save the federal government and the taxpayers who are paying for it. It would save the state governments that are trying to implement a law that may be unconstitutional and costing millions of dollars to adjust their systems, and the businesses across our country that are trying desperately to determine if they're going to be able to even offer health insurance or if they want to offer health insurance to their employees anymore. Mr. President, we're at a time when there is unprecedented regulatory burden on our businesses. We are facing a $14 trillion deficit in this country. Trillion. We are looking at having to raise that debt limit if we don't severely cut spending and get our house in order. So, in the past 2 years alone, this federal government has borrowed an additional $3.2 trillion. Washington passed a health care reform bill that cost nearly $2.6 trillion and a stimulus bill that cost $789 billion, and now we have higher unemployment since the stimulus bill passed. The U.S. economy is frozen. Job creators are facing new levels of taxes. Now they're looking at this health insurance cost going up, and on top of that, new regulations. Heavy-handed government regulation is not what we need right now. The health care reform bill is a perfect example of government regulations hamstringing our businesses with more red tape and bureaucracy. Over a year since that bill was passed, businesses are still facing unprecedented premium increases, as high as 20%. Employers are finding their policies being canceled because insurers are closing up shop due to new federal regulations. Health care reform is requiring individuals and businesses to buy government-approved health care. or they pay hefty fines. Health reform has discouraged businesses from hiring because if you go over 50 employees, the new federal regulations are going to be costly, or, again, you're going to be fined if you don't decide to opt in. A new study out this week confirms that health reform will not let you keep your health plan as promised. This report found that when businesses fully understand all the new regulations required under health reform, as many as half of them say they will definitely or probably stop offering health insurance benefits to their employees. That would leave as many as 78 million Americans on their own to find health insurance for themselves and their families. That is why I have filed Amendment number 423, to delay further implementation of health reform until the courts determine whether it is constitutional. My amendment would pause further implementation of this law so that we don't spend millions more of taxpayer dollars at the federal level, at the state level, and costing small businesses as well when it could be struck down. 26 states have sued the federal government, and a Florida district court found in favor of these 26 states, saying the federal government, the Congress, had overstepped and overreached its authority, so that mandating the individuals to purchase health insurance was unconstitutional. The 11th Circuit Court, as I said earlier, is hearing this case as we speak, and we should not burden any further the businesses and the states and the taxpayers that support the federal government until we know if this law really is constitutional. Let's just put a moratorium, a pause, so that no one is going to get penalized for not continuing the implementation process. Clarify, and then, if it's constitutional, there's plenty of time to go forward, but if it isn't, as I hope is the case, we will be able to start all over to make more affordable health care available in this country without cutting Medicare, overburdening our taxpayers and businesses, and maybe we would get our economy going and stop this rising unemployment that we are seeing in our country right now. 9% unemployment is too high, and health care reform is a part of the problem that is causing it. Thank you, Mr. President, and I yield the floor.
I ask unanimous consent that the pending amendment be set aside and that I be allowed to call up Amendments 417 and 418 en bloc.
Is there objection? Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President.
The clerk will report the amendment.
The Senator from Ohio, Mr. Portman, reports en bloc amendments numbered 417 and 418.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent to dispense with the reading of the amendments.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. Today we're considering a bill intended to promote economic development, and I think it's only appropriate that we also talk about regulations because, unfortunately, regulatory mandates are stifling economic growth today, and they're keeping us from creating the jobs that we so badly need. I hear it all over the state, and I'm sure my colleagues do as well. Companies are saying, we'd like to expand, we have a good idea, we have a business plan that works, but we're deterred by the cost of complying. It's the red tape, it's also the uncertainty. So it's not just the bureaucracy and red tape that's adding costs, it's the uncertainty about future regulations. This regulatory burden on employers, by the way, is growing, and it's already immense. There's a recent study by the Small Business Administration in the Obama administration, which estimates that the annual toll now of federal regulations on the American economy is $1.75 trillion. That's more than the IRS collects in income taxes in a year. With the unemployment rate now at 9.1%, we can't continue to ask businesses to spend more on red tape. Instead, we want them to invest in job creation. The current administration, unfortunately, I believe, is moving in the wrong direction on this score. We've seen a sharp increase over the past couple of years in new what are called major or economically significant rules. Those are defined by regulations that impose a cost on the economy of $100 million or more. According to the Office of Management and Budget in the Obama administration, The current administration has been regulating at a pace of 84 of these new major rules, over 100 million per year. By the way, that's about a 50% increase over the regulatory input during the Clinton administration, which was about 56 major rules per year. I was very encouraged by the words of President Obama as he introduced his January executive order on improving regulation and regulatory review. But now we need action. We need to be sure that the agencies are actually taking the measures necessary to provide regulatory relief for job creators and reducing this drag on our economy. One common sense step that we can take right now is to strengthen legislation that's already in place. It's called the Unfunded Mandates Reform Act. It was passed by Congress and signed into law by President Clinton in 1995. It was bipartisan legislation. I was one of the authors of this legislation in the House of Representatives. UMRA, as it's called, Unfunded Mandates Reform Act, was a bipartisan effort basically to say that regulators had to evaluate a rule's cost and find less costly alternatives before adopting one of these so-called major rules. The two amendments that I'm offering today would improve UMRA in a way that's entirely consistent with the principles that President Obama himself has laid out in his January executive order on regulatory review. The first amendment would require agencies specifically to assess the potential effect of new regulations on job creation and to consider market-based and non-governmental alternatives to the regulation. It would also broaden the scope of UMRA to require cost-benefit analysis of rules that impose direct or indirect costs of $100 million or more. And it would require agencies to adopt the least costly or least burdensome regulatory option that achieves the policy goals set out by this Congress. Common sense ideas. The second amendment, 418, would extend UMRA to the independent agencies. 1995, it was imposed upon the federal government, but not on independent agencies. Those independent agencies have grown, and so have their regulations. This would be an agency like the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission, or the CFTC, or even the new Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which has gotten a lot of attention here in the Senate in the debate over the health care bill. Right now, they're exempt from the cost-benefit rules that govern all these other federal agencies. So major rules issued by this what's called headless fourth branch of government are not even reviewed for cost-benefit justification by OIRA, which is the Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs at OMB, which reviews regulations from all the other agencies. Based on information from the GAO, it now appears that nearly 200 regulations were issued between 1996 and this year with an impact of $100 million or more on the economy that were from independent agencies. So again, over 200 regulations that were not subject to review under UMRA because they were from independent agencies. So there's a clear need to extend UMRA to these independent agencies. Closing this loophole is a sensible reform. By the way, it was endorsed by the President's own regulatory czar, Mr. Cass Sunstein, who wrote in a 2002 Law Review article that it only made sense to extend UMRA, which had been in effect for several years at that point. No major regulation, whatever its source, should be imposed on American employees or on state and local governments without serious consideration of what the costs are, what the benefits are, and whether there's available a less burdensome alternative. That's what these amendments are all about. Both of them would move us further toward that goal, and I urge my colleagues to support them both. Madam President, I yield the floor. No quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Senator from Oregon.
Madam President, I ask that the quorum call be vitiated.
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam President. I rise to speak to amendment number 428, the regulation of mortgage servicing. Now, Madam President, we spend a lot of time here in Washington talking about many topics, but often not getting to the issue most important to the American citizens. That is, getting them back to work, creating jobs. Creating jobs should be the paramount concern of every person in this town. And we're not going to get job growth going again until we deal with a housing crisis that started this recession and that is blocking our recovery. 3 years ago, our economy was nearly destroyed by a combination of high-risk, high-cost, subprime mortgages and reckless bets on Wall Street. Well, since then, we've fixed many of those problems in subprime mortgages. We have ended 3 of the key predatory practices. One of those was undocumented loans, otherwise known commonly as liar loans, where the information was fictionalized. And then we had the prepayment penalty. It was a steel trap in which a mortgage document would lock people into a loan with an exploding interest rate, and it would prevent them from being able to get out of that loan. And we knew from the Wall Street Journal study that 60% of the families in these predatory loans with these steel trap prepayment penalties, those families qualified for regular, ordinary, fully amortizing 30-year prime loans. Which leads us to the third point, which were the undisclosed bonuses, otherwise known as steering payments or kickbacks, that were paid to mortgage originators when they steered families from the prime loan with a fair interest rate and 30-year amortization into the predatory subprime with an exploding interest rate and a steel trap prepayment penalty. Well, it's good that we ended those practices for the future. But for the families that have been caught up in the flood of foreclosures, it's as though we rebuilt the levees, but we haven't done anything to take away the water that's still flooding their living rooms. Just last week, new reports, the Case-Shiller Index, showed that home prices have reached their lowest level since 2002. Well, if home prices are that low, it's also hard to build new homes. Indeed, a recent report said the number of new homes being built each month had reached the lowest level since 1965. That's almost 50 years ago. Quite simply, our economy is not going to recover until our housing economy recovers. A home is the single biggest investment that most families make, and it is the key to their financial success. It is often the key to happiness in retirement. In addition to the impact on millions of families, and we are looking at the possibility of 5 to 8 million more families facing foreclosure stemming from this predatory crisis that melted down our economy in 2008 and 2009. In addition to the impact on those families, it has an impact on our communities. When there is an empty house on the street, it pulls down the value of every other home on that street. Well, as much as $2,000 to $5,000 per home. Well, that further drives down prices. That means that more foreclosures, more families underwater, less confidence in the recovery, more inclination to hold on to every dollar rather than to spend in our economy, and so the consumer spending is suppressed. And our GDP is directly linked both to the amount of money invested, and we know that many companies around America are sitting on vast sums rather than investing them, and on the amount of money that families spend. So these things all tie together to whether our economy is going to succeed or remain in its current paralyzed shape. Often it's important to take these big numbers and translate them to individual stories. And I'd like to share with you today a story about Tim Collette and his son in my state of Oregon. We received this article from the Economic Fairness Oregon, and it's titled "A Homecoming with No Home." And I'll just read the first paragraph here. Mr. Collette says, "My biggest problem now is my son comes home from the military in August, and my home is being foreclosed on in 18 days. He's been hit by an IED, people shooting at him, and he just wanted to come home and sleep in his room, in his bed, and be safe for 15 days. And I told him I'd make that happen. I don't know how yet, but I will." Mr. Collette shared his story with Oregon lawmakers at a recent hearing on foreclosure reform, and I thank him for sharing his story. And for Tim and countless others, it didn't need to be this bad. We have a program here in America called the Mortgage Modification Program, or HAMP program, Housing Affordable Modification Program. That program hasn't worked very well. Indeed, it's a voluntary program, and it has been more or less a nightmare for the families that have been applying. Often, a servicer will encourage families to apply because they make more money when a family is behind on their payments than when they're current on their payments. So often the servicer will say, you know, you probably qualify. What you need to do is stop making your payments for a period of 3 months, or maybe it's 6 months. Or what you need to do is cut your payments in half, and that'll show financial distress, and you'll qualify for this program. And so the family follows those directions, understands that they're in the process of getting a modification, and then it turns out the servicer has a different story to tell, often saying that, you know what, your credit score isn't very good because you've only been making half payments for 6 months, so you know what, you don't qualify after all, and you owe us a lot of money, and if you don't pay us, we're foreclosing. That's the nightmare of a program that was supposed to help families that has often hurt families. Mr. Collette's story is one of these stories of going through the difficulty of this program. He bought his home in 2006. At the time, it seemed like a great investment for him and his son, especially considering that he was in a position to put down more than $100,000 as a down payment. That's a situation that very few families can emulate. And he was able to afford his mortgage payments quite easily within his income. But when Wall Street's bad bets sparked the national recession, everything changed. He lives in one of the hardest hit areas of the state of Oregon, Deschutes County, and the construction industry dried up overnight, and therefore his business, his construction business, dried up overnight. He called his mortgage servicer to begin the mortgage modification process. And he did what the bank asked of him. At the time, the bank extracted partial payments, actually for years, on the false hope that Tim could receive a long-term fix. And so month after month, his equity, that original $100,000 payment, down payment, it was siphoned away. It was siphoned away through bank fees. It was siphoned away through declining property values until there was nothing less. Had his request for a modification been processed promptly, either he would have been approved or denied. If he'd been approved, that would have been great and would have locked in his payments, and he could have proceeded with that fine financial foundation. If he'd been denied, he would have had the ability to say, I've got to make a decision then. Do I put this home up for a short sale? Do I put it on the market and try to sell it for what's owed to the bank? He would have had some savings left over to pick up and start over. Well, Tim did all that was right, and he played by the rules, but he's in a precarious position today. And in just 9 weeks, his son, overseas, serving our country, will come home. And let's hope it's a homecoming with a home, not a homecoming without a home. Now, this amendment does 3 important things. And the first is that it establishes a single point of contact so that when a family talks to their servicer, they don't have to start from scratch every single time in explaining their story. And with that single point of contact, there will be somebody who has a coherent file. Because so often, each time a family talked to a different person at the servicer, that person had lost the file or lost key papers in the file or was sent additional information that had been requested but didn't put it into the file. And so a single coherent point of contact. The second thing that this amendment does is it ends the dual track in which a servicer proceeds to pursue foreclosure at the same time they're talking to the customer about a modification. Very simply, they set aside, under this amendment, would set aside that dual track, that foreclosure track, until they make a decision. They can make it over a longer period of time, over a shorter period of time, but until they make the decision and tell the customer, they set aside the foreclosure track. That would reduce a lot of the stress, a lot of the confusion, a lot of the enormous frustration that families face. The third point in this amendment is that it requires a third-party review before a servicer sends a home into foreclosure. That simply guarantees that the law has been followed, that there was a coherent examination of the paperwork and a foreclosure isn't ordered at the same time a modification has been approved, or a foreclosure isn't ordered at the same time a modification is upon the verge of being approved, or that a foreclosure doesn't proceed because a document is missing from the file. Now, Connecticut and Maine have such a program, and it has kept 60% of the families that would otherwise be out of their house in their house. So 3 basic fundamental reforms. I want to thank my Republican co-sponsor, Olympia Snowe, who stepped forward on behalf of homeowners across this nation to say yes for fairness. And I'd also like to thank the other dozen or so senators who in the last day have signed up as co-sponsors. Many of them have been real champions in their states, and some of them have worked very hard on these issues, including Senator Reid and Senator Whitehouse. In fact, just note Akaka and Blumenthal and Durbin and Inouye and Levin, McCaskill, Sanders, Shaheen, Senator Whitehouse, and Senator Wyden, and I imagine many more will join us. I encourage my colleagues to support fundamental fairness, single point of contact, and the foreclosure dual track, and have a third-party review so that homeowners get a chance, like Mr. Collette, to stay in their homes. Thank you, Madam President.
Madam President. Madam President.
Senator from Arizona.
Madam President, I ask unanimous consent to set aside the pending amendment and call up amendments numbers 411 and 412.
Is there objection?
I reserve the right to object.
What's that?
Can you hold on 411 for a second and just call it 412? We just need to check one thing. If you want to talk about 412.
Yeah. What is You're checking.
The consent request is pending.
Well, look, Madam President, I will still ask unanimous consent to call up both amendments. It's my understanding that amendments are allowed. If there's some amendments that are not allowed, I think we ought to understand that. I understand the strength of the ethanol lobby, but there was an agreement that amendments that would be allowed to be called up. If that's not the case, then I would obviously have to resort to other parliamentary measures.
Madam
I
President.
repeat my unanimous consent request to set aside the pending amendment and call up both amendments 411 and 412.
Is there objection? Hearing no objection.
Thank you, Madam President.
Clerk report.
The Senator from Arizona, Mr. McCain, proposes amendments in block numbered 411 and 412.
Madam President, I'll be brief about discussing both of the amendments. The first 411 is a simple amendment that would prohibit the U.S. Department of Agriculture from funding the construction of ethanol blender pumps or ethanol storage facilities, which is the latest effort on the part of the ethanol lobby to take more and more of the U.S. taxpayers' dollars. I would remind my colleagues that the taxpayers have already provided billions of dollars to ethanol producers over the last 30 years. Last year alone, the ethanol tax credit cost the taxpayers $6 billion. In the final hours of the last Congress, the ethanol tax credit was extended for an additional year and will likely cost the taxpayer an additional $5 to $6 billion this year. Now seeking to double dip in the federal treasury, advocates for the ethanol industry are seeking taxpayer support for infrastructure for ethanol, such as blender pumps and storage facilities. Now, the Department of Agriculture was happy to comply with the industry's request to fund infrastructure construction. On April 8, 2001, the Secretary of Agriculture issued a rule that, get this, would classify blender pumps as a renewable energy system. In other words, pumps are now a renewable energy system which would qualify it for funding under the Rural Energy Assistance Program. Madam President, there is no one who believed that the Rural Energy Assistance Program would apply to putting ethanol pumps and storage facilities in gas stations. When Congress created the Rural Energy Assistance Program, it didn't have any intention of paying gas station owners to upgrade their infrastructure and further subsidizing the ethanol industry. According to the USDA, an ethanol blender pump and tank costs an average of $100,000 to $120,000 to install. With over 200,000 fuel pumps currently operating in the United States, it would cost over $20 billion to convert them all, a corporate welfare project of significant proportions. I might point out that an amendment similar to this was overwhelmingly supported in the other body during the consideration of H.R. 1 by a vote of 261 to 158. It's time we stop this. I'm a well-known opponent of ethanol subsidies to start with because it's never been of any value. It has distorted the market, and it has been an incredible waste of taxpayers' dollars. But now they want to go further by having us pay as much as $20 billion so they can install under the Rural Energy Assistance Program blender pumps and storage facilities. So the ethanol advocates today have issued a release opposing this
amendment because it would enforce the foreign oil mandate over our transportation fuels marketplace by blocking a job-creating effort to promote the installation of flex pumps. So now this is all about jobs. We want to create jobs by spending taxpayers' dollars to build pumps. Well, we hope that my colleagues would take a look at this and support this amendment. The other amendment, 412, basically eliminates Davis-Bacon requirements from this legislation. So the issue of Davis-Bacon is well known, so all it would do is, in my view, reduce costs by some 60% from market rates if we are indeed not imposing the Davis-Bacon Act requirements. While I'm on the floor, I want to just mention to my colleagues that as we face increasing costs at the gas pump of $4 or more, there are predictions that the cost of gasoline and a barrel of oil will continue to increase. And this administration continues to reject nuclear power in every possible way. Yesterday, a House committee released the latest evidence detailing the administration's mishandling of the Yucca Mountain Nuclear Waste Repository, providing further examples of this administration's blatantly political decision to terminate the Yucca Mountain project and close the facility. I quote from the committee report. It says, quote, "Despite the President's continued assertions that his nuclear waste management policy decisions would be driven by sound science, the administration has repeatedly refused to provide a scientific or technical justification for its shutdown decision, instead simply stating that Yucca is not a workable option." This coincides with an April 2011 GAO study that reported, quote, "DOE decided to terminate the Yucca Mountain repository program because, according to the Department of Energy officials, it is not a workable option and there are better solutions that can achieve a broader national consensus." DOD did not cite technical or safety issues. There's a simple reason that neither the Department of Energy Secretary Chu nor no other member of the administration has put forth a single scientific justification on the decision not to move forward with Yucca Mountain, because there is none. Because there is none. When the NRC's Atomic Safety and Licensing Board rejected the Department of Energy's request to withdraw the license application, it noted, and I quote, "Conceding that the application is not flawed nor the site unsafe, the Secretary of Energy seeks to withdraw the application with prejudice as a, quote, matter of policy because the Nevada site is not a workable option." In fact, according to the House report, the NRC staff review of DOE's Yucca Mountain license application agreed overwhelmingly with the Department of Energy on the scientific and technical issues associated with the site, ultimately concluding that the application complies with applicable Nuclear Regulatory Commission safety regulations necessary for the site to proceed to licensing for construction. The political interference orchestrated by the administration comes with a very real cost. As of 2010, the taxpayers have spent $15 billion to research and develop the Yucca Mountain site. In addition, even while the administration is attempting to terminate the place, the energy industry and therefore ratepayers are still contributing to the Nuclear Waste Fund that was established to pay for a nuclear waste repository. According to the Congressional Budget Office, the Nuclear Waste Fund is holding over $25 billion of ratepayers' money. To date, no one has stated whether or not the energy industry or the ratepayers will be refunded those fees, and it's likely the taxpayer will end up footing the bill for the lawsuits filed against the federal government by those that have been unfairly charged. The need for a permanent waste repository remains clear. In fact, a draft subcommittee report from the President's Blue Ribbon Commission on Nuclear Waste stated, and I quote, "Permanent disposal of nuclear waste is needed under all reasonably foreseeable scenarios, and that we do not believe that new technology developments in the next 3 to 4 decades will change the underlying need for a storage strategy combining interim sites with progress toward a permanent facility," thereby completely refuting statements by the administration that technology and temporary storage sites are a sufficient replacement for permanent disposal. In fact, the administration and the Secretary of Energy himself have publicly stated that our most promising technology to lessen the burden of storage, waste reprocessing, is not even being considered as a viable option for addressing waste storage needs. Unfortunately, it's been reported that members of the Commission have been told that under no circumstances are they allowed to recommend Yucca Mountain as a permanent waste repository, regardless of where the scientific evidence leads them. According to the Government Accountability Office, the termination of Yucca Mountain could set back the opening of a new geologic repository by at least 20 years and cost billions of dollars. And of course, these billions would be in addition to the $15 billion taxpayers have already spent to research and develop the Yucca Mountain site. You know, it's really a sad day when we allow politics or political influence to cause us to allow at least $15 billion of the taxpayers' money to be wasted and to really doom, to a large degree, the future of nuclear power in this country. We need to have energy self-sufficiency. I believe in wind. I believe in tide. I believe in solar. But nuclear power must be a part of any equation if we're going to be truly energy independent. And by closing Yucca Mountain, by wasting already $15 billion or more of the taxpayers' money, we have made that goal much, much harder to reach. Madam President, I yield the floor.
Madam President.
Senator Morgan.
Madam President, I ask unanimous consent to set aside the pending amendment and call up amendment number 440 that is at the desk.
Is there objection? No objection. The clerk will report.
The senator from Oregon, Mr. Merkley, proposes an amendment numbered 440. At the end of the bill, add the following.
Madam President, I ask unanimous consent to dispose with further reading.
Without objection.
Thank you. I yield the floor.
Madam President.
Senator from Oklahoma.
Madam President, I ask unanimous consent that at the conclusion of the remarks to the presentation by the junior senator from Oklahoma, that I be recognized as if in morning business.
Is there objection? Without objection. So ordered. Senator from Oklahoma.
Madam President, thank you. I ask that unanimous consent that the pending amendment be